Welcome to Propaganda Loves You, the show that asks and answers the question, why is Donald Trump so adamant about calling immigrants rapists? I'm Cody, your host for this week, joined by Arthur and Joe.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Propaganda Loves You. This is part two of our two-part series on propaganda around masculinity and how that has been used and co-opted by the right. Last episode on Tuesday, we kind of talked about what toxic masculinity is as a concept, what it is, what it isn't, and also talked a little bit about the man box. So this concept of certain approved feelings or emotions or things that men are allowed to do that fit within this nice little box. So I guess my question for you guys is, have you personally, has there been anything that you felt like you've done or been pushed into in that man box in your life? Like, I could name a bunch of stuff from my own past that I would think about, that I probably started doing because it was expected or it was, socially normal. But anything that you guys think you probably did that maybe you wouldn't have if it wasn't pressured onto you? I can use one of my examples first if it helps. It's like the example that I have. Well, there's probably two. I mean, one, I joined the Marine Corps, which I feel like you join the Marine Corps because you have something to prove or because of the reputation of the Marine Corps in general, right? I think that's definitely a thing. And as while I was in, I now have a semi-refined palate for bourbon, but it's not because I actually liked bourbon initially. It was it was just that was kind of the thing, right? Everyone has a drink and it's well, I'm gonna drink bourbon because it's a manly thing. And after hating it for not hating it, but not really enjoying it long enough to now I actually kind of appreciate it. But that's, I think, a direct line from something that's more societally put onto me than it was me actually genuinely enjoying it at first. So it was kind of my two examples there.
I mean, I was going to mention the Marine Corps too as an obvious thing. And I guess related to the Marine Corps thing, for me, it was like an existential crisis in my teenage years. People have a midlife crisis and stuff. I felt like I had one of those in my teenage years where I was just trying to figure out all this family trauma I was trying to process, really messy home life, just a working class kid in South Carolina. I landed on this hyper individualist streak where I just felt like all the solutions to masculinity and manhood were just I just need to figure out how to do everything by myself and never need help from anything or anybody, right? And that was kind of psychologically where my head was out. I don't need anybody. I don't need to depend on no one. I can do it myself. And my head was just constantly trying to figure that out. Happiness has to have something to do with being able to figure it all out by yourself and never needing any help. I also had a lot of older friends in high school or who had recently graduated high school and had joined the Marine Corps or had joined the reserves. And that friend group was exclusively Marine Corps. There weren't any other services represented in that group. So I think that older friendship group really influenced me in a toxically masculine kind of way to, like you were saying, you joined the Marines because you got something to prove. Yeah. I was oh, I'm not going to join the Army or the Air Force, the Navy after hearing that they're soft. I'm going to join the Marine Corps because I can do it, right? So that was directly a result of a cultural program of toxic masculinity, for sure.
Yeah, I definitely echoed the hyper independence that I thought the same thing. Masculinity is others, just needing others is weakness or something. So definitely processing and processing emotions intellectually rather than relationally and by myself, I think is something that it influenced, and internalizing the provider script, sole provider thing. And I think for me, having, I had two older brothers and a father, and there was some ties of masculinity to anger in my household growing up. And so I really learned to kind of like keep things calm and not provoke people. And it became like kind of emotional labor to be the calm one, I guess, which makes you seem reasonable, but it really burns you out because you're really hyper vigilant and regulating others and all this stuff. So I would say that, like, in that way, masculinity, I don't know, like a lot of my value systems, I think, are like born out of rejection of maybe like traditional masculinity and what I saw it do. And so maybe it like defined some of my core beliefs of more calm morality and more empathy and kind of like, yeah. So
Schismogenesis in the household for
exactly.
Oh, that lines up so much with my experience too, just like having older brothers and father figures with anger issues, learning what not to do, becoming the calm, cool, collected one who can, he's fine, he doesn't
Yeah.
need anything, he's chill. But totally see a lot of that in
Yeah.
myself.
Same.
definitely resonate with both of your independent pieces. Like that's something that I definitely, and I don't think that was necessarily pushed by my parents or my family so much. I'm trying to think it. I don't feel like it was, but for some reason,
That one's on the
yeah,
culture for sure.
yeah, asking for help is something that I still have a lot of trouble doing, acknowledging that you need help or asking for it. Like from just from like stupid stuff, like, hey, I could really use some help at the house, like changing out all of the storm windows or something like that. That could turn like a full day job into a couple hours, but I won't do it.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's so true. And it's like, it's hard to get at how pervasive this conditioning goes. Like, I've known that it's propaganda working on me. I've known that it's toxic masculinity. And yet, still to this day, Katie is telling me I need to ask for help when I need help for things. Because if it's up to me, I'll just, oh, I'm not going to ask anybody. I'll just do it. I'll just do it. I'll just do it. I don't ask for help. It's not a habit I've learned to develop and form and appreciate. And like, I just want to point out how pervasive that can be, even after you've done the mental work of figuring out that you're this way because culture has trained you to be this way. It's hard to undo that programming. It takes a lot of work that goes into undoing that programming. But the other thing I was going to say about why this is so sinister, the individualistic aspect of it, and why it's so important for the ruling class to train young boys and men to believe that they have to be independent providers and compete with every. You can't form mutual aid groups. You can't do community service. You can't organize with people and overcome the ruling class if you have a bunch of individuals who are competing with each other and just want to do it on their own. Right? It's a direct ideological barrier that's set up, I think, on purpose, but that's the conspiracy aspect of it. Whether it's on purpose or whether it just happened that way, the effect is the same. It is preventing us from coming together as a human species and putting in systems that take care of everybody instead of dropping bombs on 20 countries every day.
I don't think it's a conspiracy to say that that's purposely, maybe it's not done specifically for this, like, they're thinking we need to make men feel like they can't ask for help or they need to be individuals, but, like, American exceptionalism and individualism, like, definitely on purpose, like, because what does that do? Like, if you're an individual, you gotta represent that somehow by buying this trinket, right? Like, I would agree with that. I guess, like, that's the other thing that, and you kinda hit on it, was, like, where do these influences come from? They come from the home, but also from society and what the expectation is that's put on kids, right? Like, so it's home, school, like it's pervasive, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, it's not just one thing that causes this, right?
Yeah, and Discipline and Punish, Foucault goes through like it's like schools, factories, prisons, armies, hospitals, the family life. Like it's just a pervasive system of producing like these docile bodies through the normalization of like surveillance and repetition and training, all of this stuff. So it is like, and the problem I think we have is like our parents, our grandparents, that, it's like it's subtly just evolving and getting indoctrinated. They're not analyzing it. And then we have these caregivers as babies, whatever, who do the same, like they're just kind of producing the same thought, maybe without identifying it and stuff. I don't know. So it's really important. It's kind of cool. Like, if we all had kids, at least like we're putting the energy into these thoughts and identifying it before putting it off on somebody else, I guess. Because, yeah, all these other systems just produce this hyper individualism and masculinity issues and femininity issues.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to the point where, like, for a lot of generations before, it is the natural state, right? Like, that's just how it's looked at. It's not looked at as something that shouldn't be. It's looked at as this is how men are and how they need to act, right? Like, that's the impression that people have without, I guess, looking into it, like you're saying.
Yeah, it's super important to point out the flip side of this, like you just did, Arthur, that like this whole training of masculinity implies a reverse side of the coin, which is the way femininity is trained. And this version of toxic masculinity trains men to believe that women ought to be controlled, right? And there's a philosopher, Tate who has a book that got a lot of attention, like 8 or 9 years ago when it came out, I think. It's called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny. And her whole premise is essentially that misogyny is not about hating women. Misogyny is about putting women in a specific place in a hierarchy and telling them to stay in that place, i.e. down girl, right? And how that whole complex creates a whole host of psychological issues that women have to deal with growing up in the same culture. And toxic masculinity is abusive to men and women, right? It abuses all of us. It makes us hate ourselves. And as men who just embody toxic masculinity and don't self-reflect about it and push this issue onto others, it causes us to harm ourselves, to harm our friends, to harm women. And, it sort of cascades in that way.
Well, Joe, just to what you're saying, that there's a death count, right? Like men die earlier. Like there's reasons for that. Like a lot of these risky behaviors and like overindulgence in drugs, alcohol, like the things that are promoted in the man box, right? Like it leads to earlier death in men and increases in suicides, right? It's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think that was the thing I wrote down as you were reading the article. I was just trying to summarize what I was hearing. I wrote down toxic masculinity is when men make self-hatred a virtue.
Yeah,
And
that's a good point.
yeah.
Well, let me read the rest of that article because they come out with some suggestions or ways that we can be better. So men can be better. We can be better. While not an exhaustive list, here are a few changes that we can implement to reprogram masculinity and stop harming ourselves, our community, and our loved ones. Number one is accept help and help others. No one is impressed by your exhaustion and stoic struggle. While others extend a hand, let them lift you up. Even better, reach out to someone else, perhaps another guy you know who is drowning in something, and offer your help. Both anxiety and depression reduce when we feel connected, supported, and seen by others. You only have better health, more time, effective outcomes, and stronger relationships to gain. Number two, let others be themselves and focus on yourself. Strive to pursue your own character, personal development, and values. When others differ from the limiting masculine program, allow them to be who they are without criticizing, judging, or attempting to shame them back into the fold. Tearing others down to quell your own anxieties and fears, nor lashing out based in depression are ineffective. Addressing your own struggles is the way. Similarly, put an end to controlling behavior. Being threatened by others' opinions, characters, and choices speaks more to your own insecurities and their unacceptability. Number three, model a wide range of emotional expressions to children and young men and help them discern the cause, purpose, and appropriate channeling of the feelings. This takes genuine courage and may have to start with you practicing being okay with your own feelings and expressing them to a trusted person first. Men experience more feelings than just anger. Can you own your anxieties and face them in effective and sustainable ways? Can you let yourself feel sadness, grief, or depression without shutting down or avoiding the feelings? Acknowledging all your feelings and knowing how to manage them in healthy ways profoundly benefits your personal health, friendships, and romantic relationships. So those are the advice at the end of this article. I think we talked about most of that, but anything there that you would agree with or add to that list?
Yeah, there's an acronym that a meditation teacher named Tara Brock came up with called RAIN.
Oh my God, I love RAIN.
You know about RAIN?
Hey, it's like, can I try it? And you can tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
It's
go
off
for
of
it.
working
Go for it.
memory though, so I don't know. It's like reflect. No, I don't even know if that's the right one. And then it's like allow, investigate, nurture. What's the R?
So the R is recognize. Hey, recognize that you're
I
frustrated.
am recognizing that right now.
Allow it to take place. Investigate the feeling. And then the N is either nurture or non-identification. So sometimes what you're recognizing, allowing, and investigating is some sort of emotional distress or pain, like grief or sadness or loneliness. And what is helpful in those situations is a feeling of nurturing. So what I had mentioned earlier, the exercise I asked my students to do of like basic practices of loving yourself, of caring for yourself, you need to express some nurturing feelings towards yourself. Sometimes it's non-identification though, like with anger. If you're feeling intense anger, it can help just to be still and recognize that the anger is taking place and consciously do nothing about it other than sit there and notice it. Try to create some feelings of allowing it. In other words, notice if there's any psychology going on that is resisting the anger being there, and let go of that resistance and simply allow the anger to be there. Investigate the feelings of the anger, especially physically. Often when it comes to emotions, we dwell on the thoughts about them, but I like to say that every emotion is a combination of physical and mental sensations. And it can be really empowering to pay a special attention to the physical sensations of an emotion and sort of ignore the mental component of it. In other words, don't think about the emotion you're having and try to think your way out of it. Notice what it feels like physically to feel anger, and try to breathe in a way that calms that physical feeling down. So that's part of the investigation piece. And then the non-identification is crucial with anger, because the anger doesn't define you. So often as men, especially archetypically, when we look at media and stuff, we see these violent, angry men just bashing their enemies and stuff, and we think expressing anger is a form of healthy identification. It's not, right? So stop identifying with the embodiment of anger. Right? Recognize that it's just a weather pattern that's moving through you. It's a cloudy storm. It's going to be sunny again eventually. You just got to wait it out, right? Don't identify with the anger. So yeah, Rain. Recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture or non-identify.
Please stay tuned for a word from our sponsors. Want to stop being the volunteer and start demanding the rank? Every patriot begins as a customer, but only the most committed become the authority. It's time to learn to actually wield your investments.
He was just a volunteer. He spent all of his money on the best ironclad tactical gear, but he still needed me to tell him when to actually activate the home defense protocol. I needed a man who knew how to secure our perimeter and influence the local network.
The Alpha Alignment Academy is a one-week intensive proving ground. We teach the essentials of strategic home defense, tactical neighborhood surveillance, and the art of dominant decisiveness. You learn how to expertly wield your safety equipment while building your confidence, so you also know when to use it.
We trade indecision for command. Our core curriculum covers advanced perimeter patrol, mastering the home surveillance system, and 5 non-negotiable ways to earn the rank of big dog at your next civic meeting.
He came back focused and direct. He used to just watch the cameras. Now, he runs our area's safety shift. He even earned a high enough status to stop paying membership fees.
Do not wait. Enroll today. It's time to become the man of your dreams.
Ironclad Tactical, training the next generation of authority. So we kind of talked about what toxic masculinity is and how that has affected us or played a part in our life. I'm sure it's just a scratch of the surface there. But what I want to talk about now is how the term toxic masculinity has kind of been weaponized. And so I've got an article from Monash University. It's in, I think, Melbourne, Australia. I know it's in Australia. But this is kind of talking about Andrew Tate and how his appeal to young men has nothing to do with toxic masculinity. So I think this is a good article to go through real quick, and then we can talk about this a little bit. The big takeaway that I hope people come away with is that what Andrew Tate does, or what people do, is they try to take toxic masculinity as a term and apply that to things that are not actually in the bucket of toxic masculinity in order to make it seem like men in general are just under that bucket of toxic masculinity. By being masculine anyway, you are being toxically masculine, and therefore, like, it's an attack on men specifically. Like, try to turn this into an attack on all men, right? And that actually can turn people more towards these specific things. So I'm going to read through this really quick. This is called Andrew Tate's Appeal to Young Men Has Nothing to Do with Toxic Masculinity by by Stephen Roberts and Stephanie Westcott, both professors at the school, London University. Commentary on the appeal of controversial figures such as Andrew Tate to boys and young men sometimes and loudly argues that these demographics are alienated by feminism, discussions of patriarchy, and the use of the term toxic masculinity. Some commenters suggest boys and young men are tired of being blamed for the patriarchy they had no part in creating, and this frustration drives them towards figures who appear to offer sympathy and an alternative narrative. This explanation, however, confuses cause and effect. Regardless of whether we think the term toxic masculinity is helpful, the idea that young boys and men might gravitate to Tate because they hear talk of the phrase feels somewhat absurd. To be blunter, it's a willful misrepresentation that puts the cart before the horse and insists this nonsensical ordering is logical. Rather than being a simple reaction to unfair societal accusations, Tate's appeal lies in his skillful manipulation of genuine issues such as economic hardships and his ability to frame these issues as consequences of feminist efforts towards gender equality. This frames women, and in particular feminists, as the enemy of men's well-being and flourishing, which strokes an already growing ideological rupture. In doing so, Tate becomes not a reaction against patriarchy, but an embodiment of it. So he does this by weaponizing economic hardship. Andrew Tate and similar figures thrive by offering what appears to be a compelling solution to real economic struggles and political alienation faced by many young men across the world. In an area of precarious employment, rising living costs, and growing inequality, many boys and young men find themselves facing uncertain futures. These issues are systemic in nature, rooted in neoliberal economic policies, structural inequality, and global economy increasingly reliant on insecure labor. Yet, rather than directing frustration towards these systemic causes or making critiques of the political ideologies that enforce them, Tate weaponizes economic anxiety and redirects it towards feminism and advocates for gender equality. He frames women's rights and the push for gender equality as scapegoats for broader societal problems. This approach is incredibly dangerous. Tate's narrative resonates with those who feel disillusioned and disempowered and offers a simplistic, if deeply flawed, explanation. The world is unfair not because of complex economic forces, but because men have been dethroned by gender equality movements. His rhetoric thus serves to reinforce patriarchal ideals by reestablishing traditional gender hierarchies as the solution to the modern problems. He tells boys and young men that reclaiming their rightful place atop the social order will restore stability and prosperity. In this way, Tate serves simply as the latest patriarchy-driven ideological entrepreneur, reshaping, defending, and perpetuating its ideals for a new audience. An argument often made by critics of feminist discourse and advocacy is that terms such as toxic masculinity alienate boys and men, pushing them towards figures such as Tate. This also assigns boys and men a victimhood status, whereby they claim to be persecuted by the use of a term that offends and mischaracterizes them. This is separate from considerable writing on scholarly merits of the term as an academic concept. This critique of a commonly used lay term misunderstands the purpose and scope of the phrase. Toxic masculinity is typically taken by its critics as meaning, or at least conveying, that masculinity is harmful and bad. We're not committed to the term either way, but find it entirely non-controversial. Indeed, if understood in the way the English language works, it's pretty clear that it doesn't label all masculinity as harmful. Rather, the modifier toxic alludes to a specific set of behaviors and cultural norms that harm people of all genders, including boys and men themselves. These behaviors include aggression, emotional repression, and pursuit of dominance at all costs, among other ideals that form a sort of man box that constrains men and boys. Manipulatively framing the phrase toxic masculinity as an attack on men rather than a critique of harmful practices, figures like Tate exploit genuine feelings of alienation and defensiveness. They present themselves as defenders of masculinity under siege, offering a space where boys and men can feel valued without having to confront or unlearn damaging behaviors. This narrative, like the one around being blamed for patriarchy, is deliberately misleading. The issue is not that boys and men are unfairly blamed, but they're being offered false solutions by ideological entrepreneurs who profit from their discontent. Ideological entrepreneurs in a post-truth era. The tactics employed by Andrew Tate can be understood through the lens of ideological entrepreneurship. Ideological entrepreneurs are individuals who craft and promote specific ideologies for personal gain, often by exploiting societal anxieties. In Tate's case, his brand of hypermasculinity and anti-feminism taps into broader cultural insecurities and positions him as a thought leader for those seeking clarity in a confusing world. This phenomenon is not unique to Tate. It mirrors the tactics of high-profile figures in the post-truth era, such as Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Both Musk and Trump are known for their ability to shape narratives that resonate emotionally, often at the expense of factual accuracy. They create a sense of belonging among their followers and make calls to broaden that following by offering simple, seemingly compelling explanations for complex issues. In the same way, Tate offers boys and young men a narrative that makes sense of their struggles without requiring them to critically engage with the underlying causes. The post-truth moment, characterized by the rejection of expert knowledge and rise of emotional, subjective truths, creates fertile ground for ideological entrepreneurs. Tate's success is a symptom of this broader cultural shift. His followers are drawn not necessarily because his ideas withstand scrutiny, but because he provides a coherent, emotionally satisfying framework that appears to restore their sense of agency and control. Challenging these false narratives, understanding the appeal of figures like Andrew Tate requires moving beyond surface-level explanations that blame feminist discourse for alienating boys and young men. Instead, it's crucial to recognize how these figures exploit genuine economic and social anxieties by offering regressive narratives that reinforce unequal gender power structures. The challenge lies in addressing the real issues facing young men: economic precarity, social isolation, and search for identity, without resorting to scapegoating or regressive ideologies. Ultimately, combating the influence of ideological entrepreneurs requires fostering critical digital media literacy, promoting nuanced discussion regarding gender, and creating spaces where boys and young men can explore healthy forms of masculinity. Only by addressing the root cause of the discontent can we hope to counter the appeal of figures like Andrew Tate and build a more equitable society for all genders. So basically, we're saying that, Andrew Tate, the main argument here is like, it's not the label of toxic masculinity or talking about patriarchy or these educational terms that are pushing people towards Andrew Tate or people like him. It's their use of propaganda and disinformation that lies to their followers to give them easy to believe narratives that solve all their problems without them having to actually do any work themselves, right? Like, it gives them a scapegoat, gives them a thing to blame, right? Without engaging with those terms more from like a understanding perspective of what they actually mean. Do you guys have a same or a similar thought from that?
Yeah, I don't have a different thought from that. I was going to unpack Andrew Tate as a character a little bit, but Arthur, if you want to respond to what Cody's saying first.
I think the two things I kind of picked up from that was, one, how there's always it always comes back to the economy and hierarchy. And it's like this time of economic uncertainty and employment uncertainty. And, the individual man provider gains some sort of relief from hearing Andrew Tate talk about, how if only I could put a woman beneath me and have my domestic life in charge, I'd be happier. So it always comes back to the economy. Like, we could all just not have capitalism. And then two, it's it's interesting how at the end of it, if you think about these viewers, it's really just a mentality. Like, you walk away from it and you think oh yeah, now everything's going to be good. Even though you're still making the same amount of money, you're paying the same amount, life is circumstantially the same. It's just a mentality that you have. And you could actually control that mentality in a different way, in a positive way. And every day you could be secure and happy and whatever. So those were kind of the two things. Sorry if it went off topic.
No. I think that one that you hit on, it's like the same kind of imagining of this glorious past that never was really. Or maybe in this case it was more similar, but it's this push oh, if we only had this 1950s traditional family where the man was the sole provider, and if women weren't in the workforce, then that could still be the way it was, completely ignoring the fact that a lot of those jobs are gone, right? That's, the actual economic reality is it's not women in the workplace that are making your life miserable. It's policies that our government's put in place that have removed jobs from the US that we used to have, those steady jobs, right? Union jobs that allowed people to provide for their families.
Yeah, totally. And in order, like you were saying, Arthur, thinking about the viewer's perspective, the people, the young men especially, who are influenced by someone like Andrew Tate, you have to believe that he is like you in a meaningful way in order to, oh, he's like me. He represents my point of view in some way. Andrew Tate is not like you unless you are a very weird and horrible person. Andrew Tate is accused of multiple sex crimes in Europe, rape, human trafficking, and forming an organized criminal group to exploit women sexually. In other words, he turned women into sex slaves in Europe and is wanted in multiple countries for this kind of behavior. He's a weirdo. He's bad. He's not good. He's not like you, and he doesn't represent your point of view. But he wants you to think that he represents men generally. And if he can convince you of that, then he sounds like a reasonable person. But he's not. He's a weirdo. He's not like you.
Also pushes really hard for that grind culture, like makes people think like that, oh, you just work hard, then you can have a Bugatti too, right? Like that's his like
This man had
shtick.
actual slaves. He had
Yeah.
actual women as slaves. And he's telling you, you just need to work hard. No.
So I want to read this chapter. This is chapter 8 from How Fascism Works by Jason Stanley, The Politics of Us and Them. So I'm going to read a paragraph from the page before and then this. Fascist propaganda does not, of course, merely present members of targeted groups as criminals. To ensure the right kind of moral panic about these groups, its members are represented as particular kinds of threats to the fascist nation. Most important and most typical, a threat to its purity. Consequently, fascist politics also emphasizes one kind of crime, the basic threat that fascist propaganda uses to raise fear that members of the targeted group will rape members of the chosen nation, thereby polluting its blood. The threat of mass rape is simultaneously intended as a threat to the patriarchal norms of the fascist state and to the manhood of the nation. The crime of rape is basic to fascist politics because it raises sexual anxiety as an attendant need for protection of the nation's manhood by the fascist authority. So that's kind of leading into this chapter here. So if the demagogue is the father of the nation, that's just saying like if like you can just put Donald Trump there, right? Or whoever, right? Hitler was the father of the German nation, the Führer there. So if the demagogue is the father of the nation, then any threat to patriarchal manhood and the traditional family undermines the fascist vision of strength. These threats include the crimes of rape and assault, as well as so-called sexual deviance. The politics of sexual anxiety is particularly effective when traditional male roles, such as that of the family provider, are already under threat by economic forces. Fascist propaganda promotes fear of interbreeding and race mixing, of corrupting the pure nation with, in the words of Charles Lindbergh, speaking for the America First movement, inferior blood. Just as an aside, earlier in this book, they talk about Charles Lindbergh and how there was a very large America First movement to stay out of World War II that was actually aligned with the Nazis that kind of stopped when Pearl Harbor happened. But yeah, it's been around.
Yeah. I saw a video people had posted recently of like a massive rally at Madison Square Garden at like 1939 or something that was literally Nazi, like straight up Nazi.
Oh yeah, yeah. The Trump's last campaign rally in Madison Square Garden evoked very similar, like it was very similar to that one that took place. Oh man. Okay. Fascist characterize, speaking for the America First movement, inferior blood. Fascist propaganda characteristically magnifies this fear by sexualizing the threat of the other. Since fascist politics has, as its basis, the traditional patriarchal family, it is characteristically accompanied by a panic about deviations from it. Transgender individuals and homosexuals are used to heighten anxiety and panic about the threat to traditional male gender roles. In his 1970 article, The Black Horror on the Rhine, Race as a Factor in Post-World War I Diplomacy, the historian Keith Nelson documents the mass hysteria that gripped Germany about African soldiers serving among the French troops that occupied the Rhineland starting in 1919. German propaganda about the supposed mass rape of German women by French soldiers from African colonies was spread as widely as possible and included pieces translated into nearly every European language, including Esperanto. The German government promulgated racial fantasies of mass rape of white women by black men as a means of fighting the French occupation. The propaganda was particularly successful in the racially sensitive United States. A group calling itself the American Campaign Against the Horror on the Rhine ran off 10,000 pamphlets using money contributed by wealthy German and Irish Americans, and a rally against the horrors of the Rhine on February 28, 1921, attracted a crowd of 12,000 to Madison Square Garden in New York City. Nelson writes, likewise, a young German nationalist named Adolf Hitler could not forget that 7 million people languish under alien rule, and the main artery of German people flows to the playground of black African hordes. It was and is the Jews who bring the Negro to the Rhine, always with the same concealed thought and clear goal of destroying by the bastardization which would necessarily set in the white race which they hate. According to Hitler, Jews were behind the conspiracy to use black soldiers to rape pure Aryan women as a means of destroying the white race. This is also a conspiracy theory shared by American Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, which fantasized openly about Jews intentionally plotting the mass rape of white women by black men to undermine the white race in the United States. In the history of the United States, the fraudulent rape charge stands as one of the most formidable artifices invented by racism, writes the activist Angela Davis. The myth of the black rapist has been methodically conjured up whenever recurrent waves of violence and terror against the black community have required convincing justification. The practice of lynching black men in the United States was justified by alleging the necessity of defending the purity of white American women. In the words of the historian Crystal Feinmeister, Southern white men actively mobilized the image of the black rapist for their political advantage. The South Carolina Senator Benjamin Tillman said on the floor of the Senate that the poor African has become a fiend, a wild beast seeking whom he may devour, filling our penitentiaries and our jails, lurking around to see if some helpless white woman can be murdered or brutalized. It was not only white men whose sexual anxiety and demagoguery about black men led to the horrific multi-decade spate of mass lynchings of black American men. Rebecca Latimer Felton was the first woman to be a U.S. Senator after a long career in the public eye, by appointment for one day in 1922. A distinguished proponent of white women's rights, she also poured fuel on the fire of racism in her career, going so far as to declare in an 1897 speech about the punitive danger of black rapists. If it takes lynching to protect women's dearest possession from drunken, raven beasts, then I say lynch 1,000 times a week. The great anti-lynching crusader Ida B. Wells attempted to counter this narrative in her two pamphlets, Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in All Its Phases, and A Red Record, Tabulated Statistics and Alleged Causes of Lynchings in the United States 1892 to 1893 and 1894. Wells' findings that the majority of lynching victims were not even so much as accused of rape were greeted with widespread incredulity, as many historians have documented. Whites across the United States assumed that there was an epidemic of mass rape perpetrated by black men on white women that justified the horrors of lynching because that would make rational sense of the fear and anxiety they felt over the potential loss of status associated with accepting their black fellow citizens as equals. Where sexual anxiety might seem extreme, paranoid, or abstract, there's often a more tangible insecurity lurking behind it. These fears experienced in the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries have been repeated around the world. In the fall of 2017, one of the worst campaigns of ethnic cleansing since the Second World War swept through Myanmar, targeting the Rohingya people of the country, a population of Muslims who do not share the majority Buddhist religion. Hundreds of Rohingya villages have been burned to the ground, and mass slaughter and brutal mass rape have led to the flight of over 500,000 Rohingyas to Bangladesh. The unspeakably barbaric campaign of ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya people has its recent origins in unrest that began in June 2012 with the rape and murder of young Buddhist women by several Rohingya men. In 2014, rumors on social media of the rape of another Buddhist woman led to more violence. In general, the genocide against Rohingyas has been fueled by paranoid theories of Muslim sexual schemes to prey on Buddhist women. A 2014 article in the Los Angeles Daily News reported on the situation is headlined, Buddhist villages in Myanmar are sparking riots with wild rumors of Muslim sex predators. In interviews with experts on Myanmar, the article documents a decades-long history of Buddhist extremist propaganda about Muslim men scheming for their women. In India, Hindu nationalists have regularly stoked anti-Muslim sentiment with campaigns calling attention to their supposed threat. Muslim men pose to Hindu masculinity. Most recently, this took the form of a panic about a supposed love jihad. In an article in Indian Express in August 2014, the Indian historian Charagupta calls attention to an aggressive, systematic campaign including awareness rallies organized by RSS and some factions of the dominant Hindu Nationalist Party, BJP, about the supposed love jihad movement, which, according to the BJP, compelled Hindu women to convert to Islam by marriage and deception. Gupta adds that these campaigns are based on divisive principles that are sustained by constant and repetitive references to the aggressive and libidinal energies of Muslim male, creating a common enemy other. She decries the loss of Hindu logical faculties in the face of politics of cultural virginity and myth of innocence that are combined with the perceived illegitimacy of the act, leading to rants of violation, invasion, seduction, and rape. In the United States, at the moment of this writing, we also see the loss of logical faculties in the face of barrage of propaganda connecting immigrant groups to rape. Trump famously began his campaign by denouncing Mexican immigrants to the United States as rapists. In an article for the New York Times in September 26, 2017, Caitlin Dickerson wrote that what happened in the small town of Twin Falls, Idaho, where 3 refugee boys aged 7 to 10 and 14 were accused of some kind of sexual activity with a 5-year-old American girl. Immediately after the incident, Facebook groups formed about it with links to articles on the internet claiming that the little girl had been gang raped at knife point, that the perpetrators were Syrian refugees, and that their fathers had celebrated with them afterwards by giving them high fives. Soon thereafter, the headline article on the Drudge Report, one of the most visited sites on the internet, screamed, "Report, Syrian refugees rape little girl at knife point in Idaho." The articles were all false. For one thing, as the Dickerson reports, no Syrian refugees were resettled in Twin Falls. It's not clear that there was any attack at all. A police officer, based on his cell phone video of the incident, called the internet descriptions of it 100% false, like not even close to being accurate. Nevertheless, the fake news stories created a wave of intimidating harassment against public officials in Twin Falls and a storm of outrage against refugees in the community. In short, they created a moral panic about the sexual danger refugees posed for American white girls, a panic that has yet to subside. The rhetoric on immigration that surrounded the Trump campaign and continues to surround his administration parallels the tactics of Russian propaganda outlets, which have spread fake news stories as well as grossly exaggerated facts about Middle Eastern immigrants raping white women in Europe. To take just one example, discussed in September 2017, New York Times article by Jim Rutenberg, Russian propaganda outlets tried to create a fake scandal about a supposed rape of a 13-year-old girl in Berlin by a Middle Eastern immigrant in 2016. Multiple media outlets produced stories about the supposed rape, stoking outrage among the German Russian community, ultimately to the point where 700 people gathered to protest an event that never occurred. Russian media coverage of the Russian fake news stories inflamed outrage. The fact that all of this eerily mirrors the spread of German propaganda campaign in the 1920s of the Black Whore of the Rhine should dissuade us from adopting the view currently in vogue that this sort of fake news is a consequence of the modern revolution in social media. Please stay tuned for a word from our sponsors. Are you still investing in simple savings accounts? Let's be honest, your portfolio looks soft. Are you even a man if you don't gamble your life savings on crypto? Freedom Coin is here to remind you, true success isn't found in stability, it's found in risk.
My old financial advisor kept using words like prudence and diversification. I told him if I wanted predictable returns, I'd go play fetch with my dog. I needed a chance to prove myself as a man.
At Freedom Coin, we believe that true financial mastery is proven not by caution, but by command. You prove your conviction by the percentage of your family's future you are willing to risk on the highest yield, unregulated assets. This is where the cautious are left behind and real power is claimed.
We're not talking about slow growth. We're talking about generational wealth or total collapse. It's the ultimate financial test of competence. If you can handle the volatility of the market, you can handle the command structure of your home, your workplace, and your nation.
I feel powerful. I took out a second mortgage and put it all where my Freedom Coin guy advised. My wife doesn't understand, but I told her this isn't about feelings, it's about vision.
True wealth is proven when you put everything on the table.
Stop being a follower. Get off the bench and show your conviction. Freedom Coin. Risk is your only true asset. I'm going to pause there because that's a good spot. I feel like that's the way that kind of connects with talking about economic issues and this whole view of the nation as a family, and that men have to protect the purity of women, right? Like drugging into these like traditional, I guess, man box, right, things like, so it's basically using that masculinity or the traditional man roles as a way to basically stoke fear, but with this threat of rape from others. So yeah, let me pause there. Any thoughts, anything that you guys thought connected with what we've talked about today?
Myth making is so powerful. And when you, like, in each of those instances, it's like the disproportionate representation of statistics is actually being highlighted or just completely made up, I guess, for these stories. And like, I know that like murder, right? One, rape is done by like, I think it was like some study that I read in college. So it's a little old maybe, but it's like, it was like 60% of rapes were perpetuated by people that knew the victim, and like it was like 60 something percent, a little higher than 60%, were like white males, and out of it was like hugely like 90% or something like that, who were males in general that did this. So it's like you take all those buckets and actually, okay, it's white men that are doing this, and they were doing it to, it's not white women, it's like Black people, and just like what you're saying, I'm sure transgendered people and minorities of groups that this is being done to. So it's a lot of like, it's how this myth making is in our culture and the economy of like, creating this. And yeah.
Yeah, what you're saying there made me think back to that thing that we've come back to again and again with a number of issues, that every accusation is a confession in some way. And when I was listening to everything you were reading, Cody, first of all, I was just struck by how intersectional the analysis is, like how it touches on every layer and strata of how society gets constructed. And I was just thinking about this in the history of colonialism and how this myth making has had to take place. I mean, Arthur, you were just talking about white men abusing non-white women. And I'm thinking about Thomas Jefferson and all of these slaves that he raped, and how frequent of a practice that was for white landowning, slave-owning men in the colonial period just to rape their slaves. And yet it's that group that wants to tell poor white men that it's non-white men they should be afraid of, and how the ruling class uses this accusation/confession to get groups to distrust each other so that they can't work together. Because in the early colonial period, like the Jamestown colony, when these peasant white colonists couldn't really grow sufficient food to feed themselves and were starting to starve, and the colony was kind of falling apart, a lot of people fled into the woods and joined indigenous groups. And a couple of seasons later, when they got back on their feet, when the colony got back on their feet and they found out that some of their AWOL people were living with the indigenous groups, they didn't want to come back to the main group. They said they were happier there. And so they can't let these groups empathize with each other, because, you're just going to have poor white people fleeing to the non-colonial side. You have to create a system of media and narrative and myth making to get them to believe that they ought to hate each other. And that unravels over several hundred years and turns into, all the atrocities of the 20th century that we talk about. But it's all connected, and it's all interconnected, and it's highly complex how it's layered. But it does have to do with this sinister propaganda program of just getting, in as many ways as possible, getting average people to distrust each other, to be individuals, to not trust each other, to hate themselves, to deny help. Another way of putting it is, men, we just need to learn to love. We need to learn to love ourselves and love others and accept love and give love and be kind, gentle people in a very masculine way. We need to make masculinity gentle again. Let's start there.
Yeah, expand the definition of masculinity, right? Like it doesn't, it's not this little tiny box, right? Like just kind of erase the lines around that. And that's to say, like, there's nothing wrong if you are just like a holder of traditional masculine traits. That doesn't mean you need to act differently. Like, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, if you're like a big sports person and you're really into that and you only do traditionally masculine things, it doesn't mean that you need to now do things that you don't enjoy doing, right? Like, you just don't need to trash people that do enjoy doing those things and treat them like they are no longer masculine, right? I guess is what I'm thinking there.
You guys heard about 911 calls, in like domestic violence calls increasing during mass sporting events?
No.
I believe it though.
was trying to look up some quick numbers about it because I kind of just casually heard about it a while ago and don't have like specific data to report. But yeah, I mean, watch sports, but don't, you know, scream at your partner when they interrupt your sporting viewing event to ask you to help with the kids. Like, get over yourself and do your domestic duties if you have them, but also enjoy your sports. I mean, I don't know if you guys are aware, I'm sure you know examples, but of men who are just glued to the TV during a sporting event and will literally snap and have like a psychotic break if they're interrupted from viewing their sporting event. That's a toxically masculine way to view sports. There is a healthy masculine way to view sports too.
Okay, so this is just the last couple pages of this chapter. Patriarchal masculinity sets up men with the expectation that society will allow them the role of sole protectors and providers of their families. We've talked about that, I think, a ton in our previous episodes. In times of extreme economic anxiety, men already made anxious by a perceived loss of status resulting from increasing gender equality can easily be thrust into panic by demagoguery depicted against sexual minorities. Here, fascist politics intentionally distorts the source of anxiety. A fascist politician has no intention of addressing the root causes of economic hardship. It's like, like just almost a direct quote from that Andrew Tate. We're not going to actually solve the issues, but we're going to give you a scapegoat. Fascist politics distorts male anxiety, heightened by economic anxiety, into fear that one's family is under existential threat from those who reject its structure and traditions. Here again, the weapon used in fascist politics is a supposed potential threat of sexual assault. In March 2016, the General Assembly of North Carolina House passed Bill 2, the so-called bathroom bill. The bill mandates that local boards of education enforce single-sex, multiple occupancy bathrooms, meaning that transgender individuals had to use the bathroom of their birth sex. Thus, a transgender girl would have to use a boy's bathroom. The entire debate surrounding the bathroom bill focused on the threat posed by transgender girls to cisgender, non-transgender girls. Its sponsors and supporters pushed for the bill by arguing that transgender girls were likely sexual predators. The Republican governor of North Carolina, Pat McCrory, justified the decision to sign the bill by arguing that House Bill 2 was necessary to protect women of North Carolina. Legislators in more than a dozen U.S. states in 2016 considered the bathroom bills modeled after House Bill 2. Julia Serrano explains in her classic work Whipping Girl that trans women, because they choose femininity, pose a serious threat to patriarchal ideologies. This is a quote from that book. In a male-centered gender hierarchy where it is assumed that men are better than women and that masculinity is superior to femininity, there is no greater perceived threat than the existence of trans women who, despite being male, inheriting male privilege, choose to be female instead. By embracing our own femaleness and femininity, we, in a sense, cast a shadow of doubt over the supposed supremacy of maleness and masculinity. In order to lessen the threat we pose to the male-centered gender hierarchy, our culture, primarily via the media, uses every tactic in its arsenal of traditional sexism to dismiss us. And that's the end of the quote. Since the original publication of Serrano's book in 2007, rhetorical attacks on trans women have moved into the center of U.S. politics. Given the significance of gender hierarchy to fascist ideology, the politicians have been trying to foment mass hysteria about trans women. Is unsurprising if this effort is understood as a manifestation of fascist political tactics and a sign that fascist politics is ascendant. Conversely, the growing acceptance of trans women is a strong affirmation of liberal democratic norms. Recall the importance of patriarchal family to fascism. The fascist leader is analogous to the patriarchal father, the CEO of the traditional family. The role of the father in the patriarchal family is to protect the mother and the children. Attacking trans women and representing the feared other as a threat to manhood of the nation are ways of placing the very idea of manhood at the center of the political attention, gradually introducing fascist ideals of hierarchy and domination by physical power to the public sphere. Maria Schmidt is a far-right Hungarian historian who is director of the Hungarian House of Terror Museum in Budapest. In an article about Schmidt's 2017 book, Language and Freedom, that a linguistics professor at the University of Vienna, Joanna Laxo, published online in the Hungarian Spectrum, Laxo describes Schmidt's enemies as Muslim immigrants, left-wing liberal elite, and George Soros. In the same review, Laxo quotes from Schmidt's criticisms of Angela Merkel's decision to admit around 1 million Syrian refugees into Germany and the country's reception of them. Schmidt writes, "A normal man or boy will know his duties and defend his wife, daughter, mother, or sister. Only these Germans of today have turned so brainwashed and unmanly that they are not capable of that." Schmidt blames the acceptance of large group of Syrian refugees into Syria on the decline of patriarchal gender roles in that country. What fills the large gap in logic in this explanation is Schmidt's assumption of a fascist mythic past before the decline in which men played the supposedly traditional patriarchal gender role of protecting women from foreign influence. Highlighting supposed threats to the ability of men to protect women and children solves a difficult political problem for fascist politicians. In liberal democracy, a politician who explicitly attacks freedom and equality will not garner much support. The politics of sexual anxiety is a way to get around this issue. In the name of safety, it is a way to attack and undermine the ideals of liberal democracy without being seen as explicitly so doing. By employing the politics of sexual anxiety, a political leader represents, albeit indirectly, freedom and equality as threats. The expression of gender identity or sexual preference is an exercise of freedom. By presenting homosexuals or transgender women as a threat to women and children, and by extension, the men's ability to protect them, fascist politics impugns the liberal ideal of freedom. Women's right to have an abortion is also an exercise of freedom. By representing abortion as a threat to children and to men's control over them, a fascist politics impugns the liberal idea of freedom. A person's right to marry who they wish is an exercise of freedom. By representing members of one religion or one race as a threat because the possibility of intermarriage is to impugn the liberal idea of freedom. The politics of sexual anxiety also undermines equality. When equality is granted to a woman, the role of men as sole providers for their families is threatened. Highlighting male helplessness in the face of sexual threats to their wives and children accentuates such feelings of anxiety at the loss of patriarchal masculinity. The politics of sexual anxiety is a powerful way to present freedom and equality as fundamental threats without explicitly appearing to reject them. A robust presence of politics of sexual anxiety is perhaps the most vivid sign of the erosion of liberal democracy. Politicians then turn their attention to the sites of the most egregious and concentrated source of sexual deviance and violent threats, cosmopolitan urban centers. In the books of Genesis, Sodom and Gomorrah are cities that are singled out by God to be destroyed by their wickedness and sin. And there is textual controversy over what sins were said to be the reason for the destruction of these cities, but regardless of scholarship, in the historical imagination, the sins have been taken to be sexual in nature, specifically homosexuality. Cities have long been treated in rhetoric and literature as a place of decadence and sin, most particularly sexual decadence and sin. Sodom and Gomorrah are biblical reference points for the source of sexual anxiety, where homosexuality, race mixing, and other sins against fascist ideology are most likely to occur. That ends the chapter. But the reason that I wanted to read that is because it reminded me, Joe, of some of our earlier conversations about what freedoms we actually have. And it really called out, like, these are individual freedoms, right? If you're not infringing on somebody else, hurting somebody else, then all we're doing with these policies is taking away individual freedom. And I thought that that was called out really well in that part there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I was just thinking about from the dawn of everything framing when they talked about freedom, and they framed it as the freedom to move, the freedom to change, and the freedom to disobey. We already talked about immigration and colonialism, which has to do with movement. The freedom to change is what we were just talking about, like your sexual expression, who you choose to love or not love, what family groups you form, what communities you form. If people are free, they can form their own groups and communities as long as they aren't harming anyone. But you see again and again, when people try to do that, that governments and the elite try to repress and stop them from doing that, or scapegoat them into some kind of enemy. And then, of course, the freedom to disobey. I mean, come on, that's the last one we're going to get back, right? So yeah.
Never again.
Yeah. Even though the whole myth, American myth, starts with this whole glorified act of disobedience, you're not allowed to disobey.
Not even allowed to protest now. You get shot in the face with a, grenade, wherever it is, if you're a priest, apparently.
Yeah, I kind of like attached when you were talking about these marriages and typical roles in society, I guess, like of caregiver and mother. I was thinking about this woman, Carol Pateman, who wrote this in like the late 90s, something called The Sexual Contract, where she talks about how like contracts in general create like a subordinate and a dominant being, and how traditionally, of course, marriage contract is like property, like viewing women as property specifically, and like men dominating that, and how that role, I guess, in modern culture gets taken out to be like the breadwinner and like the man achieves, and just how like the role of woman, their wife or mother in either way, is like to kind of lift up the man and to give them the agency. And so they're giving their agency onto another person. Then I guess I was thinking about like capitalism embraces that. Like, they love the individual, they love the contract relationships. If it's like labor or marriage, it's really promoting that. And how, I guess, like even in like Soviet Russia, the proletariat ended up being a lot of men all the time. It's just like the class struggle really needs to, I think, like, yeah, we need to maybe focus on class struggle and like radically freeing gender, I guess, from the economic system. And that, I don't know, the economic systems are not going to ever allow that. And like these people like Tate might show up, but it's like, that's because it's literally a product revenue, and like it's being encouraged, because otherwise there would be a law around that not being allowed on the internet, or what, like it shouldn't be, maybe. There's no moral coding there. So capitalism is like definitely thriving off of this stuff, and we got to shut it down.
That book, I think near the end of it, it talks about like what are the common or the best ways to like organize against fascist politics. And one of the things it talks about is that fascist politics needs to shut down as quickly as possible is class solidarity. So like that's why they go after unions, because if they're not able to, they know that like if minorities and white people all like are in unions together, then they see each other as partners in the struggle, not as ways that they can kind of divide up individuals and make them against each other. So I thought it was spot on with what you were talking about there. That's everything that I had for today. Anything else you guys want to hit on?
Well, Arthur said we have to shut it
it
down.
down.
And the best way to shut it down is a general strike,
Yeah,
baby. Go to generalstrikeus.com, sign the strike card, get involved with your local group, start mutual aid, start organizing, prepare to strike.
Yeah, it's like all the root causes in each of these things that we've read and put together, it seems to be the economy. And it's always at the worst times in like the economy, like Great Depression, like after individualism is like asserted and it's like Great Depression hits, like that's male suicide rate hitting a height. And same right now, like we're in an epidemic of male suicide hitting a height, and like look at the state of the economy and like how we're taught to be providers. And if we can't meet that, it's just, yeah. So maybe the economy is the problem.
Oh, can't be that.
Okay, well.
That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening and hanging out with us.
If you enjoy the show, help us spread the word. Leave a rating or review and share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think would get something out of these conversations.
Your ratings, reviews, and shares help this show grow, and the more people listening, the harder it is for propaganda to win.
So until next time,
Stay aware, stay safe, and remember,
Propaganda loves you.